All right, good morning. This is Attorney Vince Davis, and these are my morning office hours. We try to do these office hours every day, 7 days a week, and they're at 6:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if you ever want to catch the show live, check us out on YouTube or Facebook at 6:30 a.m. 7 days a week. All right. Today, we're going to be talking about suing social workers. Been getting a lot of requests to talk about this issue. I'm actually in the process of developing a self-study course on how to sue a social worker. And it's going to be about a 10-week course given twice a week, maybe Tuesdays and Thursdays, for about an hour and a half. And it's going to take you from A to Z, soup to nuts, on how to sue social workers under federal law. Now, a lot of people want to sue social workers under state law. It's my contention that federal lawsuits may be a little bit better, depending on the case, but it's something that you should talk about with your attorney. But I primarily focus on federal causes of action, specifically 42 USC 1983, which is the general civil rights statute in this country. The reason why I like federal claims is because federal courts, it has its pros and cons, really. One of the pros is federal judges move cases forward quickly and efficiently. And it does it both for the plaintiffs and the defendants. Additionally, in federal court, generally you have to have when you have a jury trial, you're going to have get 12 out of 12. In California, 12 jurors out of 12 jurors to agree with you and to award you money. In California, it's a little bit easier. You only have to get 9 out of the 12 jurors to agree with you. But there's also different rules of evidence. There's the state rules of evidence. And then, of course, in federal court, there's the federal rules of evidence. And there's different rules of procedure. Federal court has the federal civil rules of procedure. And in states like California, my home state, they have the Code of Civil Procedure. Similar, but different. Same for the rules of evidence. Similar, but different. And sometimes those differences can be important. So the bottom line is, yes, you can sue your social worker. Now, the question becomes, is there a probability that you're going to win? And if you're suing your social worker to get the children back, that's probably not going to work. If you sue a social worker, you probably want to sue for damages, for money. If you want your child back, you're going to have to, in most cases, win that case in the state CPS court. Now, there are exceptions. There are rules like filing a writ of habeas corpus and filing other types of preliminary injunctions in federal court. I was just communicating with someone back in New York yesterday about filing federal lawsuits against social workers. And this person was not an attorney, but she was actually giving me good information about writs of habeas corpus and rules of jurisdiction, whether you can file in one state versus another state. And, when you try to do this, you must have a lawyer, in my opinion. You must have a lawyer. I know it's America, and people feel that justice should be able to be performed by anyone, but you going to court and trying to sue a social worker in the county or the state is tantamount to you trying to perform open heart surgery. You probably don't have the training, the experience, the knowledge, and you just can't Google this. Okay. Just like you can't Google open heart surgery and go perform open heart surgery. Okay. So get a lawyer, talk to a lawyer, even if you're just going to consult with that lawyer. All right. Generally, um, these are the areas where you can sue a social worker. Number one, where there has been a removal of the child without a warrant. Okay, I know in a lot of counties in California, and I hear about states, especially back east, social workers will come to your home, generally with the police, no warrant, no exigent circumstances, and detain your child. Well, I am here to tell you in 99% of those cases, that's violating your civil rights. And when your civil rights are violated, you have a cause of action where you can go to court and sue the social worker. I'm on a case right now where they showed up. This is Los Angeles County, so I think they might be still doing this. According to my client, they showed up at the home with, well, first of all, the police showed up and did a raid. Subsequently, the social workers showed up and detained the children. No warrant for taking the children was ever found. Now, the rule is you can't take children unless you have a warrant or exigent circumstances. And this was my argument in court. And although the court didn't say one way or the other, I think the judge agreed with me. If you show up and the police were there, there's no exigent circumstance. The children aren't in danger with 20 cops standing around. So if you want to detain the children, it's my belief you have to have a warrant. Now, warrants are given in most counties here in California and states across the country. There's a judge or a commissioner on duty, 24/7, even on holidays. So they have the ability to get that warrant or that court order to detain your child. Whether they do or not, that's a whole nother discussion. Another way you can sue the social workers for denial of due process. Everyone in this country, whether a citizen or not a citizen, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled that you are entitled to due process. What is due process? Due process is that the social worker has to follow the letter of the law with respect, for example, taking your children without a warrant. For example, you being notified properly that you have a court date. I know in California, and this is a huge problem, when they take your children, they don't necessarily, in my opinion, notify you the correct way that, hey, you have a court date coming up on Monday at 8:30 a.m. So you got to look out for the due process issues that sometimes CPS violates. The next major topic of suing a social worker, and this is a big one, is the fabrication of evidence or reports against you. I happen to know that, and I've experienced it myself on cases. Social workers may have a tendency to not accurately report what they found in an investigation or what a witness said. I'm going to give you an extreme example, and this was actually a true example. I was doing a trial, and the social worker submitted a report prior to the trial, and the trial said the minor's therapist said XYZ. Okay, fair enough. If the minor's therapist said that, and the minor's therapist's testimony was being used against my client. Well, prior to the trial, the client kept telling me, look, Davis, the minor's therapist didn't say that. And my reply was, well, how do you know you weren't there? And she said, I know because I spoke to the minors therapist who told me she's never talked to the social worker, never met the social worker, never texted with the social worker, never emailed with the social worker. So during the trial, I put the social worker on the stand. And I said, well, here you report that the minors therapist said XYZ. Yes, the minors therapist said that. And I don't recall offhand if I asked her this, but I would have probably asked her, like, when did she tell you that? What was the date, approximate time, blah, blah, blah. Right? Well, after the after the social worker testified, case goes on. And then at some point in the trial, when it's my turn to put on my case in chief, I subpoena in the therapist. And I say, hey, therapist, did you ever tell the social worker XYZ? No. Did you ever text the social worker XYZ? No. Did you ever say that on the phone or in person? No, no. Did you ever email the therapist? Email the social worker the XYZ? No, no, no. Well, why do you think the social worker quotes you as saying that she spoke to you and that you said XYZ? I have no idea. I've never met the therapist. I've never talked to the therapist. I mean, I've never met the social worker. I've never talked to the social worker. The social worker was not telling the truth. Now, you might find that surprising. After doing this almost 40 years, I do not find it surprising at all. Now, the next area of suing a social worker can come in the violating of your constitutional rights. For example, your First Amendment, your Fourth Amendment, and your 14th Amendment. And these all relate to due process and freedom of speech. And we've kind of touched upon that. But the last area where you can sue a social worker is if you generally your child or a child is injured in foster care. Now, over the years, I've had many cases where people have talked to me about the child was abused in foster care, sexually abused, physically abused, emotionally abused. You can sue the social worker for that. On occasion, I have heard of or been counseled about allegations about the social worker injuring a child, or the social worker somehow allegedly uh, requiring you to pay a bribe or sexual favors in return for a favorable recommendation or return for the children coming home. Now, I have told this story before, and it's kind of a wild story. It happened a couple decades ago, when I was a court appointed attorney, maybe almost 30 years ago. And it had to do with a client that I had that was I was a court appointed attorney for, who lost her children at the jurisdictional dispositional hearing due to drug allegations. Now, this particular client was a young woman, very attractive, and as a profession, or her job was, she was a dancer, a stripper. And the judge ordered that she do, drug testing, drug counseling, et cetera, et cetera. And when we came back from the 6-month review hearing, um, although I have no proof of this, I I was under the impression that my client had not done anything. Yet and still, the social worker in the report wrote that the client had done parenting, had done drug counseling, had done drug testing, and there was even copies of evidence of all of this. And um, now here's a report that has my client doing everything, and then my feeling um, that my client hadn't done anything. So, of course, I didn't want to know, and I didn't want to um, question my client about this, but it's just interesting that you can social workers are human beings, and so suffer the same, you know, frailties as other human beings. And are bribes um, beyond a social worker? Probably not. I've worked on many drug cases over the years where um, one person declares, but usually doesn't have any evidence or evidence they've shown me that the social worker has been bribed with money and or drugs. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. I have no idea. There was an incident. There was a lawsuit that I did bring one time where a woman came to me and said, um, the social worker is making up lies against me because she's having an affair with the father. And the father wants to get custody because I had taken him to child support court and got a huge child support order against him. Well, that case never went to trial. It almost went to trial, but the social workers in the county ended up settling that case for a large amount of money. And the allegation was that the social worker had made up a case against the mother to take the child away for the benefit of the father. Then the benefit being so that he wouldn't have to pay child support. You know how crazy this is. When the woman first came to me, I'm kind of looking at her like, is this really true? And that was number one. And number two, can you even prove it? Like, how are you going to prove that the social worker is having an affair with the father, making up lies against you just to help the father? And I told the lady, I said, hey, you know, I I believe you, but I don't think you can prove this. And I told her, come back to me when you have proof. Well, a couple months later, she did come back to me and she did have proof. You know what her proof was? She had followed the social worker and the father to a motel, and she videotaped them going into a motel room and coming out, an hour or so later. Now, all of this time, when the woman first made these allegations, I wasn't her attorney, but she was kind of laughed out of court, right? She had no proof of this. And of course, the father and the social worker denied these accusations. But she came back with videotape. And because of that, I started representing her in the CPS case, got her child back, and I represented her in a lawsuit. And there's a funny story about that lawsuit. At some point in time, we're in the federal court, and the judge tells us, I think you better tells the social worker's attorney, I think you better go to mediation with Mr. Davis and try to settle this because it's not going to turn out well for your client. And the funny thing was that the social worker's attorney was really fighting us, really trying to put up a defense for the social worker, which I guess is his job, right? But the tape spoke volumes. Now, when you sue a social worker, there's something that you have to consider right from the beginning, and that is social workers enjoy a type of immunity. Now, in American jurisprudence, there are several different types of immunity. And the type of the immunity that the social worker enjoys is kind of, towards the bottom rung, but it's still immunity. It's called qualified immunity. Okay. Now, there's something called absolute immunity where you just can't sue the social worker. That doesn't exist yet. Anyway, you can sue the social worker, but she has qualified immunity. And what's the difference? Well, qualified means I can sue you if I can prove fraud or malice. Okay. If I can only prove negligence, you enjoy immunity and I can't sue you. So let me give you an example. Social worker gets on the stand and commits perjury. The qualified immunity doesn't kick in and you can sue the social worker. Social worker gets on the stand and she testifies and tries to prove that what she did, although stupid, was just a mistake, a careless mistake. In that case, you can't sue the social worker. she would enjoy qualified immunity. So mere negligence, you can't sue the social worker for. Fraud or malice, you can sue the social worker for. And that's because of the concepts of qualified immunity. So make sure that when you decide to talk to a lawyer about suing a social worker, that you and or the lawyer explore that issue of qualified immunity. It can really ruin your case. Have I ever seen cases or heard of cases where that were thrown out because the court approved or um, agreed that the social worker had immunity? Yes, I have. There's a famous case, actually. It's out of California, out of, I believe it's San Bernardino, but it was in federal court where the parents sued the social worker, and the trial court gave the social worker or granted the social worker immunity. The parent was upset and appealed, and the case went up on appeal, and the parent won. And the Court of Appeals, the Ninth Circuit said, well, we understand that the trial judge agreed with the social worker that she should enjoy immunity, qualified immunity. But based upon what happened in this case, we don't think that there's qualified immunity, and therefore the parent can sue the social worker. And in that case, what happened, there was an allegation that the father had been sexually abusing his child. I think it was his child or his stepdaughter, something like that. Anyway, the social worker goes out and um, interviews everyone and makes a determination, for whatever reason, not to detain the child. The child is left in the home with the father. A few days goes by or a week goes by or something, and the social worker is back at the office and is talking about the case with the supervisor. And the supervisor says, "Oh my God, you didn't detain that child? Go back and detain that child." So the social worker goes back, detains the child after, days had gone by. And the father sues the social worker. Well, the Court of Appeals decided that what the social worker had done did not deserve qualified immunity. She actually went back and detained the child without a warrant because of what her supervisor said. Not any new evidence, right? If you had new evidence, maybe the detention of the child would be justified. But the social worker went back and detained the child without a warrant, and just on the recommendation of the supervisor. So if the judge rules against you that qualified immunity applies, it is something that you can appeal. I've given you some cases about settlements, about cases where there is immunity, where there's not immunity. Um, Next, I want to talk about settlements and going to trial. Fortunately or unfortunately, a lot of these cases settle, but they don't settle right away. They make sure that you have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and maybe, 2 or 3 months before trial, they may talk serious settlement. One of the largest settlements I ever obtained in one of these CPS civil rights cases. I think we were about 2 months from trial before we settled, and it had to do with me taking the deposition of the social worker, who finally admitted that she did not tell the truth under oath to the court and to the federal court. And the social workers and their attorneys became anxious to settle. The case settled. I didn't recommend the settlement. I thought the settlement was too low. But the settlement judge convinced my client to take the settlement, which was still high. The settlement judge convinced the client that it was life-changing money, which it was, and the case settled. So if you believe that you have been wronged, talk to a civil rights attorney, talk to someone, because you should be asserting your rights, so that hopefully social workers will get the message and counties will get the message that You can't violate people's rights in these cases, even if you're doing God's work and trying to protect children. All right, we'll briefly talk about the filing of a 1983 claim. So, one of the good things about 1983, 42 USC 1983, the civil rights statutes is, um, despite the qualified immunity, if you win, you can win attorney's fees and you can win punitive damages. Now, what are attorney's fees? Well, let's say you sign an agreement with your attorney that you have to pay them 40% of whatever you win at the time of trial. If you win, that 40% or a large part of it will be ordered by the judge to be paid by the defendant. So let's say you win $1 million and you win the attorney's fees motion. You don't have to pay 40% from the money that you win. The 400,000 the attorney was going to get, the judge could order the social worker and her attorneys, not her attorneys, but the social worker could order. The judge could order the social worker to pay your attorney's fees. So you get to keep your million, and then your 400,000 is paid by, in addition to, by the social worker or the county. All right. There's one thing that you should realize when you're bringing a lawsuit under 42 USC 1983, and that is there's a statute of limitations. In other words, if you wait too long, you can't sue the social worker, even if she violated your rights. Every week I get calls from people that, you know, tell me about a case where their rights were violated. And I would have to agree if they're telling me the truth that their rights were violated. But they've waited too long. In California, generally, the statute of limitations is 2 years for a federal civil rights case. Now, the key is, when does that 2 years start running, right? 2 years from when? So you and your attorney are going to have to figure that out when the 2-year date starts running and when it expires. The statute of limitation becomes a very big issue in a lot of cases. That's why I tell people, don't wait to file your lawsuit. File your lawsuit up front so that you have plenty of time, and so that's not, the defendant doesn't have the chance to argue the statute of limitations. All right. Now, it's extremely important that you get a lawyer, civil rights lawyer, that's familiar with the CPS procedures, the CPS laws, the general flow of a CPS case, because that attorney will know, how to do discovery, how to make motions, how to question the social worker at the deposition and at trial. I know not a lot, but several CPS civil rights lawyers hire or consult with attorneys that are, CPS law experts. And then, of course, there are some attorneys that are civil rights lawyers and they're CPS experts. So that's one of the considerations that you also want to think about when in terms of hiring uh, a civil rights lawyer. There's a question, cooking with CER Senior. How does the cases in California help us here in New York? Well, published cases in California in what's called the Ninth Circuit could help you because there's general law that is made that supposedly could apply to the entire country. Are there rules in the Ninth Circuit that are different from North Carolina? Yes. Should the rules be the same? Probably. But this is something that you want to consider talking to an attorney about. I know, as an attorney bringing civil rights cases, sometimes in motions, I quote cases from back east because they help us. It's a national form of government. So it's not like North Carolina case versus California case. It's a whole federal system. And that's one of the reasons also why I bring cases a lot in federal court and not at state court. Cooking also says, how do you stop retaliation from CPS in the courts after fighting them in court? That's the $64 question. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you just hope that people will play fairly, and you better have a good lawyer to make sure that that retaliation doesn't stick. Have I ever seen social workers retaliate? Yes, I have. I've heard about it. I've seen it. All right, next question is from Child on YouTube. Good morning, Attorney Vincent. I have a question. Have you seen a case of a parent killing the foster caregivers because of abusing of his or her child during their care? I have not. I have not had that case. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've heard of that case. But now that you mention it, I can see something like that happening very easily. You know, people are emotionally bonded and psychologically bonded to their children. And if anybody hurts your child, you know, just like, you know, in the old neighborhood, if you do something to my child, there's going to be retribution. So I could see that happening, but I haven't heard of it myself. All right. We've come to the end of the show, the end of the office hours. I wish I could take more questions, but I can't go over today. I have a very busy morning. I want to thank everybody for watching. We'll see you tomorrow at 6:30 a.m. And by the way, we're working on having that call-in number set up by the producer, Grace. And hopefully one day quickly you'll be able to call in, ask your question, and I can answer it for you. All right, everyone, have a good day, stay safe, and see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.